Welcome, Arrow fans, to another Feats and Capabilities evaluation. Today, we're taking a look at one of the more underrated fighters in the Arrowverse, Roy Harper, the ward of Green Arrow himself, or better known as Arsenal.
Just remember, those without arrows.
Roy Harper was born and raised on the streets of Starling City, a thriving metropolis to the rich and privileged, but to those on the inside, it is a city overrun with violence and corruption. Primarily the Glades, which is the section of the city most hazardous and poverty-stricken. It is a neighborhood where random murders are a regular occurrence, where crime is rampant, and where bloodthirsty psychopaths walk fearlessly, always searching for prey. This is the area where Roy spent every day, growing up without even a mother or father. And we can see with characters such as Mick Rory, Anarchy, Danny Brickwell, and the upcoming Richard Dragon that a life spent surviving on these hard streets can be just as effective conditioning as training with the League of Assassins. When we first meet Roy, he's only a young man and has no formal training, but through just sheer experience of being raised in possibly the roughest neighborhood in the whole world, he is already capable of fighting small groups of opponents single-handedly, even doing something as advanced as using the centripetal force of a wall run to deliver a devastating strike. And even when one opponent reveals a knife and stabs Roy, Roy doesn't even flinch.
You okay?
You're bleeding!
Yeah, that's what happens when you get stabbed.
So even at this very early point, without any formal training, Roy is still amazingly talented, physically adept, and tough as nails. There are many examples of his potential throughout the first and second season, including his ability to throw projectiles like a trained professional with perfect speed and accuracy. Basically, Roy already has a very strong grasp on the fundamentals, and his training under Oliver only refined him. Before the season's end, Roy is already keeping up with Sarah and easily catching arrows. Granted, the Mirakuru serum was boosting him physically, but he's not fighting with just brute force. He elbow blocks all of Sarah's strikes, then catches her staff with one hand and slips through her defenses to grab her by the throat with the other hand. In this case, all the Mirakuru did was make his elbows strong enough to act as a weapon against the staff without them shattering. But otherwise, this was pure training at work. Same with sensing and catching an arrow from such close range. Other Mirakuru users definitely weren't doing it, so we can't attribute Roy's feat entirely to the serum. At least part of it was him. And he has a very similar performance against Bronze Tiger, being able to sneak attack him without being noticed and then dodging two of his slashes before counterpunching him when he's open. Roy even grew skilled enough to fight enhanced super soldiers with just his fighting skills. This is no small feat and often gets overlooked just because Roy was armed with cure arrows, but he was still needing to strike and defend against up to 2 super soldiers at once with just hand-to-hand, while he maneuvered them into position where he could actually inject them with a syringe. Roy ended up beating and curing 5 super soldiers by himself, so he's still noticeably weaker than the more experienced warriors like Oliver and Nyssa, but in his own right, being able to parry, stun, outmaneuver, and even outright floor super soldiers on a consistent basis is a testament to amazing skill. I'd say Roy is at least relative to Sarah at this point. I don't think they're on par because Sarah is still a lot more experienced, but between his natural talent, outfighting her at least once, not to mention Bronze Tiger, and their similar performances against Mirakuru users, I'd say they're actually on the same tier. Which is a real testament to Roy that he was able to catch up so quickly. And keep in mind, Roy at this point still has very little formal training. This is all just the fundamentals being applied perfectly. And although I wouldn't count this as Roy keeping up with Oliver, since Oliver was not trying to fight Roy at this time, Roy is sparring with Oliver completely evenly by Season 3. Every character in Arrow is choreographed to reflect their unique training and fighting style, and Roy's style mirrors Oliver's, primarily using Eskrima, Wing Chun, Jeet Kune Do, and Taekwondo, as well as utilizing his bow as a sword or a staff in close quarters engagements. But when Roy actually got some serious training, it didn't take long until he proved himself against his first real rival, Isaac Stanzler, the protege of Wildcat. Now, Wildcat was established to be a peer to Green Arrow, especially in pure hand-to-hand. In fact, Wildcat was actually Starling City's first vigilante when Oliver was still on the island.
I used to be a vigilante. I used to be you.
So it makes sense that Wildcat trained Isaac to a similar degree as Oliver trained Roy. The only difference is Isaac has about 6 years of experience over Roy, meaning he's not a sidekick to Wildcat anymore so much as he's an equal. He operates as a solo vigilante at this point, and the opening to the episode reveals that Isaac busted up a major drugs deal, killed everybody there, and strung up all of their bodies like punching bags just to send a message to Wildcat. There were 14 mobsters involved here, and Felicity later tells us that they were all armed to the teeth, yet forensics show Isaac never fired a shot. He beat each of them to death one by one with brass knuckles, never even being touched. Just try and imagine how this scene actually must have played out, Isaac fighting 14 armed mobsters at once using just hand-to-hand. He obviously must be an expert fighter, and this is supported by his ability to sneak up on both Wildcat and Green Arrow, and sneak up on Wildcat again later on. Which is saying a lot, because Ted was able to sense Oliver himself hiding in the shadows. The point is that this guy is no sidekick. He's a psychotic mass murderer and specializes in hand-to-hand combat. He was even able to dodge one of Oliver's arrows and ram him with a car after kidnapping Ted. So now it's Roy alone as the only hope for them both, pit against a far more experienced fighter who's also armed. Roy reacts quickly and closes the gap between them with an acrobatic flip while kicking the gun out of Stanzler's hands, which also sends him down the alleyway, although Stanzler rolls with the force of the blow and makes a quick recovery. The two are then pitched in an extremely rapid hand-to-hand duel of blocks and parries, but Roy is ultimately able to trap Stanzler's arm and deliver a clean kick to his ribs. When Stanzler tries to strike back, Roy parries the blow with his other hand while initiating a joint lock on the hand he still has grabbed. However, Stanzler shows his own acrobatic talents by expertly flipping out of the lock, releasing the tension and even landing on his feet. The scene cuts to Oliver, but Roy and Isaac are presumably still fighting off-screen. When it cuts back, Isaac parries a powerful strike from Roy, sending him off balance long enough for Isaac to put him in a headlock. However, Roy sinks to his knees and tosses Isaac over his head, skillfully escaping the hold, and while Isaac is rolling to his feet, Roy runs over and delivers a knockout punch across his jaw, ending the fight. And Roy's skills in hand-to-hand only continue to develop across the season. It reaches the point where he is able to fight 2 League of Assassins members simultaneously and win, and we've seen what these guys are capable of. But Roy's crowning moment comes at the end of Season 3, when he sacrifices himself to save Oliver by confessing that he is the Arrow and gets sent to prison. While being escorted, 3 other prisoners, all much larger than Roy, and 2 of them armed, plan an ambush to kill him. Roy does sense the ambush right before it happens, but he doesn't react fast enough to save this schmuck, and he ends up surrounded. Now, just a look at the position Roy has found himself in. He is handcuffed behind his back, and as if that wasn't enough, his arms are being physically restrained by a man much bigger than him, while a second man is holding a blade against his throat, with a third guy flanking him just for good measure. What possible move could he make to escape this situation? Well, in a feat of amazing tactical positioning, awareness, and skill, Roy first uses his shoulder to safely deflect the knife away from his throat, while kicking up the third prisoner's staff and sending him off balance. The knife wielder immediately takes a swing, but Roy ducks him, and simultaneously kicks him away while knocking down the man who is restraining him, freeing himself. The staff wielder comes back while Roy is on the ground, trying to stomp him, but Roy dodges that too and immediately rolls out the way of the follow-up staff strike while looping his cuffed hands out to his front just in time to use them to catch the next staff strike. Roy wraps his hands around the staff before kicking the prisoner away, taking the staff as his own just in time to knock back the knife wielder as soon as he returns to his feet. The third guy actually manages to catch the staff when Roy goes for him, but Roy reacts immediately and just floors him with an uppercut instead, while immediately back-kicking the prisoner rushing him from behind. Unfortunately, the knife wielder lands a nasty cut all the way down Roy's back at this point, but he doesn't let it impede him as he reacts immediately to stomp down the attacker's raising foot, before smoothly taking him out with his foot across his jaw. Roy barely dodges another strike from behind, only to immediately duck a strike from his other side as well, and in the split instant while the missed strike puts the attacker off balance, Roy slams him to the floor, taking him out. He parries the next blow from the final prisoner, before delivering an elbow across his jaw, followed up by a headbutt against his fist that nearly breaks the prisoner's hand, an elbow and a kick to the gut, and while the prisoner is on his knees, a final spinning hook kick across the jaw that lays him out. That is a lot of simultaneous factors Roy was accounting for and dealing with, all at rapid speeds, making tactical decisions in split seconds. Let's take a look at how this all played out in real time.
Let's see how good you are without your arrows. Good enough.
So, to recap Roy's hand-to-hand experience, he fought close quarters against super soldiers without a problem. He was trained extensively with a fighting style that mirrors Oliver's. He surpassed a far more experienced vigilante who was skilled enough to kill 14 armed mobsters using just hand-to-hand, and he himself also easily dismantled every fodder he came across. He could defeat 2 League members at the same time. Although less experienced than Sarah, he elbow-blocked all of her staff strikes with precision and then easily slid past her defenses. And he laid out 3 would-be assassins while surrounded and handcuffed behind his back.
Just remember, that was without arrows.
Now you want to know what he could do with arrows? Well, despite not starting off very good at it, through repeated practice and Oliver's tutelage, Roy eventually became a master archer. He is without a doubt the 4th best in the whole Arrowverse, surpassed only by Green Arrow himself, the Dark Archer, and Nyssa Al Ghul. His most impressive shots include hitting the blade of a small knife while in midair atop a 2-story building right before a mugger could stab Laurel, and hitting an enemy gang member just as he rounds a corner from all the way across the warehouse while under heavy fire and in midair descending to the floor. He's able to sever a thin wire going across the floor, and even curved an arrow with ease. And as far as tagging arrow timers goes, Roy has the impressive feat of tagging 2 League members simultaneously with 2 arrows fired side by side. If we look at the canon Arrow comics, Roy was able to save Oliver from the Mirakuru-enhanced Caleb Green by firing an arrow through Caleb's knee while Caleb's foot was mere inches away from Oliver's head. And Mirakuru users move at low superhuman speeds, which is even reflected in the art with Caleb's foot blurring, so making this precision shot so quickly is really impressive. And although this technically isn't archery, perhaps even more impressive than tagging a Mirakuru user moving at high speeds with less than a second to aim is tagging Nyssa Al Ghul, considering her remarkable reflexes in conjunction with all her combat experience. Roy was pitched against Nyssa in hand-to-hand combat, and although he could at least defend himself, he was also smart enough to recognize that he was facing a far more skilled martial artist, and that hand-to-hand was ultimately going to be a losing battle. So unlike Laurel, Roy actually took the tactical approach and surveyed his surroundings, spotted Diggle's tranquilizer gun on the table, and broke free from the battle so he could grab it, dive to the floor, and shoot Nyssa before she could react, putting her down. Roy even dove straight off the edge of a skyscraper without any hesitation and effortlessly grapple-arrowed his way down. Overall, Roy's fighting style is very accurately mirrored to Oliver's, not just speaking hand-to-hand, but his skills at large. For example, Roy also shares his mentor's talent for strategy. Defeating a superior opponent in Nyssa is only one example. He also masterminded a complex plot to clear Oliver's name for the Arrow's murders, while faking his own death so that everyone would get off scot-free. Even going back to when he was first introduced, Roy was using his brain to get out of trouble, by correctly predicting that Thea, who was pressing charges against him, would be observing his confession, and crafting a story on the spot to manipulate her into forgiving him. And as far as sheer toughness goes, besides several instances of enduring deep stab and slash wounds and continuing to fight without a problem, Roy is also one of the only people alive who was able to survive injection of pure Mirakuru without a sedative. The agony from this is indescribable. You start bleeding from the eyes, and all your organs begin to shut down. This puts Roy close to Slade Wilson as far as determination and willpower goes, as the only person besides them who ever survived pure Mirakuru without a sedative was Cyrus Gold, aka Solomon Grundy. And if that's not tough enough for you, then there's also this lunacy where Green Arrow and Arsenal are propelled out of a 5-story window by an explosion, and both completely demolish cars upon landing, but then they just sorta get up like nothing happened. Yeah. Meanwhile, Roy's abilities as an acrobat, which were already nearing the levels of an expert based off his ability to scale a 10-foot fence in seconds and the aforementioned use of centripetal force to boost his striking strength, raise off the charts after he hones them through formal training. He is able to perform amazingly complex flips and twists with absolute ease, climb around the environment like he's goddamn Nathan Drake, swing around his opponent's body like a stripper on a greased-up pole, or just somersault over their heads like they're playing leapfrog, and even fly. Skipping ahead to Season 4 for a minute, Roy performs a few feats which are just outright ridiculous, not the least of which being when he was cornered by Diggle and Black Canary and escaped them through an air vent that was suspended 15 feet above the ground by running up the vertical wall and then backflipping perfectly into the duct. Later on, he has a chase with Oliver, and the most notable aspect is that Oliver actually hops onto the back of a nearby truck in order to try and catch Roy, but Roy on foot completely leaves the truck in his dust. Granted, the truck wasn't speeding or anything, but just look at how quickly Roy left the truck behind, and while doing parkour too. I'd say that's a good 30 miles an hour feat for Roy. He also finds time in this episode to embarrass Mr. Terrific. Granted, Mr. Terrific didn't have any real fighting skills at this point, but he was an Olympic athlete and acrobat with some fantastic skills in his own right, yet Roy completely outdoes him in agility. Roy also has this little badass moment where he actually catches the T-sphere and just casually holds it at his side until the exact moment before it detonates, at which point he throws it back at Mr. Terrific. Very Oliver-like of Roy. How he knew this device was going to explode and exactly when it would happen, who knows? But that makes it a pretty nice feat of cunning and tactics, defeating Terrific with his own weapon. And at last, in the climax of the episode, Roy performs one of the most impressive feats ever seen across the Arrowverse. An explosive has to be set off manually, meaning one member of Team Arrow has to stay behind and literally outrace the explosion to escape. Roy immediately volunteers, declaring confidently that he can do it.
Do this the old-fashioned way and manually set the charge.
Yeah, but how do we do that and get out of here in one piece?
Someone has to stay behind.
I'll do it. Even if you trigger the C4 with an arrow at a distance, you still need to outrun the blast radius.
I can do that. Yeah, just because you're wearing red doesn't make you the Flash, Roy.
I didn't say it wasn't going to be risky.
For Pete's sakes, they literally compare him to the Flash. This is a metahuman level feat required of Roy, and amazingly, he actually succeeds.
Just like riding a bicycle.
For a more base-level speed feat, Roy has dodged gunfire from Brick twice, and they were surprise attacks too. And Brick is no fodder, he's actually a pretty good marksman, so this is impressive. So what's next for Roy? Personally, I'd like to see him get a big boost on the food chain. His skill set is already like a miniaturized version of Green Arrow's, from their fighting styles to archery to their tactical talents. But that means Roy lives in the shadow of his mentor, with nothing to make him stand out. That's even the origin of his codename. They call him Arsenal because he is another weapon in Green Arrow's arsenal, which is actually pretty demeaning. But think about this. Roy started training with Oliver midway through Season 2. They could say that since he left Team Arrow, he's been patrolling his own city, keeping on the low key but still gaining valuable experience by operating solo. Then when he returns in Season 6, he would have almost 5 years of vigilante experience, not counting his life spent surviving in the Glades, so he could easily become a force equivalent to what Oliver was in the first 2 seasons. Not equal with current Green Arrow, but a dangerous man in his own right capable of having adventures independently. Then they could switch his codename to Red Arrow to signify he is no longer a sidekick, but instead a peer. like how Dick Grayson went from Robin to Nightwing. Roy's feats on their own are very strong, but within the context of the Arrowverse, he's still nothing next to Nyssa and Oliver. Do you believe he should grow and become more independent, or do you think he's better suited to just being another piece of Oliver's arsenal? Let me know in the comments below, leave a like, and thank you for watching.